Thanks for joining us on Expats Everywhere. Tell us your name, where you're from, and a little about your background.
Okay, my name is Tim. I'm from the Chicago area, and so my background is I was an English major, and a few years out of university, I had my first teaching experience, and that was in Mexico City. Then I did that for 2 years. A few years after that, I decided to go back into teaching. So there were several years between that experience, which was a really positive experience, and then my next teaching experience. So I've taught in Mexico City, China, and now currently the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Also, aside from the teaching experience, I've done volunteer work in Bolivia. So I was in Bolivia for a couple of months, and I also studied for a summer in Spain. So that's kind of my living abroad experience in total.
Okay, so really quickly, let's recap. What countries have you lived or worked in?
Okay, so lived or worked in, it's Mexico, Bolivia, Spain, China, and Saudi Arabia.
Okay, great. What was it like working in Mexico?
Well, in Mexico, so I was in Mexico City, which I think would be a very different experience from the rest of the country. It was a really formative experience. It was my first time living out of the country, and really my first time teaching. And Mexico can be a hard place to make a living as a teacher. There's a lot of demand for English classes. It's not that easy to have steady full-time work in Mexico City, or it is perhaps possible to have very steady work but not very well paid work in Mexico City. You're definitely not going there for the money. I mean, there are plenty of foreigners that still want to go there and teach English though, because it's just a cool place to live.
Okay, well, so what type of jobs are available in Mexico for expats?
Well, I think the most common jobs are not necessarily the best jobs. The most common are teaching in business, teaching in large businesses, corporations, and you'd probably be teaching before business hours from like 7:30 or 7 o'clock till 9.
Okay.
Possibly at lunch, and then probably after work. So you'd be dealing with split shifts. An issue you might have with this kind of a teaching job is you have a lot of cancellations. Sometimes those are paid cancellations, depending on how the policy for your company is. Or,
sure.
Another thing is, possibly you could just eliminate the middleman and just charge a lot more and just deal directly with a company like that. And I think that's what people who've been there for a while end up doing, and they end up not having to work that much and being able to kind of make ends meet that.
So they become freelancers themselves.
Yeah, I guess I didn't say I've actually taught in Mexico twice. So, the first time was quite a while ago. It was 2004 to 2006. But I've also just more recently taught there, just for a short period of time. It was about 5 months. That was right before I went to China.
Okay.
That both times, or I should say neither time, did I teach in an actual school the way I did in China and the way I'm doing now.
Well, let me ask you, what did a typical day look like for you in Mexico?
Well, my experience the first time around, I was, I got hired by a company, my first time teaching ever, and I was happy to just get hired. And what happens is maybe there's a company will have a group of students, and that might be paid for in advance, and they'll kind of say, well, hopefully we get another group for you, and that may or may not happen.
Okay.
So I kind of lucked out though, because what happened with me is, so I had that group, and then I got another group, or another individual actually. I had a group, and I had one guy who was he was a corporate lawyer, and I think I taught him 50% of the scheduled classes, and I got paid for probably about 80% of them. So that's an issue though. If you're just losing a little bit and you don't even have that many hours, that's an issue for you. What happened is I was kind of at the point where I was about to quit, because I was I don't really have enough money to live. and they just offered me a part-time office job. And so I went from that part-time office job with maybe like 3 groups that I was teaching per week, maybe. So I might have been teaching, 15 hours a week or something like that, or maybe fewer.
Okay.
And I had that part-time office job, and then after about 5 months there, I just was like full-time admin. So I had a full-time salaried position, and then I taught in the mornings only. So I wasn't teaching that much.
Wow.
And that was kind of the rest of my Mexico experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an interesting story. Well, can you tell us about how much can someone expect to earn being as a teacher and also doing admin work like you did?
Well, this is a long time ago, and there's some tricky things because like the peso is like very low right now in relation to the dollar. So I've not seen that salaries are that much higher though. Wages have stagnated in many places in the world. I think in Mexico City, you would want to be making probably about 16,000 pesos a month.
Which is around how much in dollars?
It's like a bit under $1,000.
Okay.
Or maybe a bit more actually. Again, like the currency is not what it was. And so actually in like 2004, I think my base salary was like 10,000 a month, and then I taught on top of that. So then I had extra money from that, and I had some kind of commission thing going because I was also recruiting new groups. So
you
I was
like a jack of all trades for these people.
kind of, yeah. Just
All right.
something you kind of fall into, and that Mexico City is kind of a place where that sort of thing can happen. But I mean, a common thing also would be to like perhaps have something like that I had going, but then you meet people and you might just teach them and just have them come to your house.
Okay.
That's very common.
What can someone charge for that?
You should charge at least 200 pesos an hour, at least.
Okay.
Unless you're like doing somebody a solid, but basically like 200, 250. If you're, a lot of people that do English classes are pretty well off, and so and if they were to go to a company, they'd be paying so much more.
Okay.
You can definitely, 300 an hour, 200 to 300.
Okay, that's a good range to let people know. So you said that you were making around 16,000. Is that right per month?
No, I'm saying like nowadays. I think that's what you'd want.
Okay, nowadays is what you want.
Yeah,
So,
I was probably making like 10 years ago.
is this enough money to live on, and what type of lifestyle can you live?
Yeah, I was pretty comfortable there, like in terms of now you're not probably, I'm hoping you're not going to Mexico City as an English teacher expecting to pay down your student loans though. So that's probably not an option for you. If I was just living comfortably. I had a pretty active social life, and I was able to take advantage of a lot of what the city had to offer, which is a lot. And I took weekend trips, frequently.
Okay.
Yeah.
How much could someone possibly save there, if any at all?
I think you'd probably just want to spend it all on traveling around Mexico.
Okay.
It's not really, you wouldn't be able to save that much, but it depends. My experience in Mexico was not as a highly qualified, experienced teacher. It's I was at the entry level when I was there. So, I think in Latin America, at that level, you can't earn too much. It is a good place to get your feet wet. But if you're a qualified teacher, like if you have a teaching certificate from the U.S., for example, and you want to work at an international school, I think then you could do all right. Then you could save money, and then you could travel to other countries perhaps.
Okay. How much money does someone need to start up there? If they're just moving there, what should they have in the bank account just to get them by until work got going and they got their first paycheck?
Well, it kind of depends. See, my experience, my situation was like I didn't come to Mexico with a job even. I just showed up and kind of like pounded the pavement, found work that way, and that's a common thing to do in Mexico City. especially for Americans because it's just not that far away. You know, you can just show up and if it doesn't work out, just go back home. It's not that big of a deal.
Right.
Probably, though. So if you do that, you probably want $1,000.
Okay.
You might be just living off of that for a whole month.
That's not much at all. Okay.
Yeah. And you can live on less. Now, I mean, of course, if you're not living in a place permanently, you might be paying more to stay in a hotel or whatnot. I mean, back in 2004, I stayed in a hotel for $10 a day, like a decent sized hotel. Maybe not in the best neighborhood, but like a decent sized hotel. It was reasonably clean.
Okay. So let's say someone's ready to move. They've got their $1,000 startup. What type of things should they pack, and what's the weather like? How should they pack?
Yeah, I mean, Mexico City, the elevation's pretty high. It's like it's above 2,000 meters, so it's not. I mean, to me, it's the ideal climate. I mean, it's the summers aren't too hot. The winters, I mean, you want to bring more than a hoodie. You want to bring a light jacket for the winters, especially if you're doing like these split shifts and you're like, up at 5:30 walking to work. I mean, you want a coat, and you'll see like most people in Mexico during certain times of year are pretty bundled up.
Okay.
Special things to pack though. I don't know that there's. I would just say that probably like. Don't expect to maybe do too much clothes shopping there because I think it's going to cost more than in the U.S. Like unlike China, I thought that clothes shopping was really good in China. Depends on like what size of a person you are, I suppose.
Right.
But clothing is probably an issue. I just want to bring all the clothing you think you need, and just be aware that in the winter it's going to get down to maybe even below the 50s at times. Yeah, that's kind of it. But it's not gonna, and you're not gonna, and don't. Another thing I would probably say is like, don't just like bring flip flops, and your work shoes. Like it's like people aren't just walking around in flip flops in Mexico City. Like
right.
It's not the beach.
Is there anything that maybe you can't find in Mexico or Mexico City that you should bring from your home country?
I can't think of anything. I think you can find a lot of the same stuff. I don't know. Are you thinking food or just things that you might need
in general
for living?
Yeah.
I think I've been bringing kind of the same things to every place, and I haven't found that I need specific things for some places.
Okay, great. This is a big question that a lot of people have. How safe is it there, and did you feel safe personally?
Well, I mean, it's got big city crime, Mexico City, at the time I went there, people were scared to go to Mexico City. People were intimidated by it, partly just because it's a big city, but also partly because of its reputation. It's probably among the safer places in the country now. I mean, sort of like the kind of warring cartels are not so much they're not so much affecting Mexico City. I mean, you've got to be street smart. You've got to watch your back, at night. Just use common sense at night. So, I mean, I didn't feel especially unsafe compared with, say, if I were in Chicago.
Okay.
I mean, you need to be careful about where you go, which parts of the city you go.
Okay, good. So, how did you meet people?
It wasn't hard. I mean, I guess I ended up meeting a lot of people through work. I mean, one of my best friends in Mexico was my neighbor, and we were like renting rooms in the same building, and we're still friends, like more than 10 years later.
Nice.
So I don't know. I just didn't find it that hard to meet people, I guess. People in Mexico are pretty friendly.
Yeah.
And I mean, this was even like, there wasn't really like much like online socializing back then.
Right.
Like in 2004, it was kind of just starting to be, and especially in Mexico, maybe like even less. And it wasn't that hard. It's probably easier now, I think.
Okay, great. What can you do for fun there in Mexico City?
You can do anything. I mean, Mexico City has tons of museums. There's a lot to offer. Lots of cultural offerings. I mean, you can typical things. Just going to movies. You can go to art house movies as well. I mean, you can. I think there's more live music than there ever has been. Right now, there's tons of bars everywhere. I mean, it's just you can have a very active social life there. People go out to. It's very common to go out for light dinner. At like 7 or 8 p.m. It's like very common for just people don't like to eat alone in Mexico City.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, go to Lucha Libre. I mean, it's not that expensive. You can do anything.
Okay, sounds cool. What do you think about Mexico or Mexico City as a travel hub? Do you think it's a good travel hub? Why or why not?
A good travel hub. Well, I mean, I don't think you're going to have that much money for traveling outside of Mexico unless you're relying on other savings. I wonder if flights from Mexico City to other South American countries are significantly cheaper than they would be even from like Atlanta or Chicago. I don't know that it's that much better of a travel hub. I'd probably suggest going to like Cuba or going to maybe Costa Rica from Mexico City. But I think if you're in Mexico City for like a year or two, I mean, you've got your work cut out for you just to see Mexico. Like there's just too much to do and see. I mean, just taking short bus trips on the weekends in the course of a year, and you'll still feel like you have more short bus trips you want to take.
Right. Good advice. So last thing is, what are the pros and cons of living there?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of already touched on these things. Like, I mean, the cons would be just you can't really make that much money. You wouldn't be able to save much, pay loans, so it wouldn't maybe be a good fit for everyone. I mean, a con would be compared to Asia, it is dangerous. It's more like Chicago or LA or these kinds of places. There are gangs, there are violent crimes. It's like kind of unheard of in most parts of Asia. At least my experience of like most of the expat teachers I know who worked in like places like Korea, Japan, China, not much crime that they really had to worry about.
And the pros?
Oh, the pros. I mean, it's just. For me, I mean, the biggest thing that I left with was learning the language, and it's a good place to do that. I mean, I don't know. I just love the city. I mean, it's just I never tired of exploring the city. It just kind of kept unfolding for me. I kept learning new things and meeting new people. It's just kind of endlessly fascinating to me. And then if you do get bored, you want to get out of town. I mean, there's just so much to do in Mexico.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you say that you need to know any Spanish before you move there?
No, you don't need to. But you should probably be serious about learning it. Or really, really probably make a promise to yourself that you're going to give it a try. You can probably get by for a while without it, though. I mean, there are plenty of people that do. But, I'm trying to imagine what that experience would be like. It would be completely unlike my experience. My experience was very much trying to immerse myself, and I can sell it based on that. I can say this is a great experience because of the opportunities to become immersed and be welcomed by the people in Mexico City. And if I don't know what your experience is going to be like if you don't want any part of that.
Okay. Listen, thanks for the advice. Thanks for meeting with us. We wish you the best in the future. Appreciate it.
Thanks.